had mentioned that we would talk about mandatory disclosures in the state of Georgia and in the state of Texas. And so, Tammy, if you don't mind, I would love to start with you and have you give us kind of a list of the disclosures. So disclosures are meant to make sure that there's a level playing field and everything's fair between sellers and buyers, that give buyers the opportunity to understand things that sellers might believe are wrong with the house. So anyway, what mandatory disclosures do you have in the state of Texas?
All right, we have a lot of disclosure. Typical disclosure would be a seller's disclosure notice. That's just about the general property condition.
And is that required? The state says you have to have one of these on a transaction?
In most transactions, yes, it is required. If it's bank owned, no. But in pretty much every transaction in selling a 1 to 4 family residential, it applies. And yes, it is mandatory property code, state of Texas, required that it has to be disclosed. And there are certain things that it has to be disclosed. Yeah.
So mandatory seller's property disclosure in the state of Texas. No mandatory seller's property disclosure in the state of Georgia. It is not required on any. Now, it is used on the majority of the transactions, but it's not required by law, by state statute in any transaction.
That's crazy to me, but more power to you.
Yep. Georgia is what is called a buyer beware state. And it says that, you know what, buyer, you better assume that something's wrong and you better keep digging until you find it. And if you don't find it, it's not the seller's fault. I'm not saying I like that, but understand that when you're out buying a home, understand that is the state law. A couple of other mandatory disclosures in Texas.
Mud district. So a PID or a mud.
Mm-hmm. And so we do not have PIDs, which is a planned something. What is a PID? Planned Improvement District. Mm-hmm. And what is a MUD? That's a municipal
utility
district. Okay, mm-hmm. So what is a MUD?
A MUD is a district that handles utilities, water. Typically, it's water, sewer, and trash. Okay. And they're districts that are built and developed just outside of the city's boundaries,
where the city doesn't serve.
Right.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it's almost like a private utility network.
Yes, with its own tax.
It's in addition to all the other taxes. So you would pay your property, you don't have income tax, I know that, but you'd pay your property tax, and then in addition to that, you'd have a MUD tax.
You don't pay city tax.
You don't pay any city tax. So maybe it's not even any more than being in a city.
Sometimes it's not, sometimes it is. It's just it's a required, because not everybody knows when they're making an offer. Not every buyer knows when they're making an offer on a home if it's in a MUD district or if it's in the city. So for example, if it's in a MUD district and you go to a school district, then you think you're in the city, you wouldn't have library access and you wouldn't be permitted to vote in the city. So there's certain requirements.
So in Georgia, we have a community association disclosure, or CAD, C-A-D. It is not mandatory. It is not required, but that's where a homeowner would disclose the amount of initiation fee, the amount of homeowners association or condo association dues. And one of the things that the form does in the state of Georgia is if the seller gives bad information, then financially at closing, the seller has to make it right. So if they said that the initiation fee was $1,000, but it turns out that the initiation fee was $2,500, then the buyer, if they agreed to it, would be responsible for the $1,000, and the seller would have to make up the $1,500. So people in the state of Georgia have to be very, very careful on those community association disclosures. You have lead-based paint, but that's federal. So same in Georgia. That's one of the few we have is lead-based paint disclosure, and that's for homes that are older than 1978. So anything built 77 or prior.
Yes. So then we would have disclosures. Well, we do the HOA disclosures, so that's similar to your CAD disclosures. Okay. Those are mandatory. Yes, if you're in any kind of, and only once have I ever seen one property that's in 2 HOAs.
Oh,
so there were 2 HOAs.
A junior HOA that is underneath an umbrella HOA. Yes, we have that. I think in Georgia we call the parent HOA, we call it a master. HOA, and then you have an HOA, and especially in subdivisions where you have six different communities, six different fields, and then they all have different HOAs, and then they're all part of the bigger HOA. So that's similar.
Yeah. Okay. So then we have if it's in a flood zone,
Hmm.
so that has to be disclosed.
In Georgia, you don't have to disclose if something's in a flood zone.
No.
No, because it's not mandatory. Now, should a seller disclose all of it? Absolutely.
Yeah.
The seller doesn't want to bamboozle someone into buying their home. And so a seller should disclose everything, whether it's required or not.